Good morning.
Good morning.
I like football. Of all the sports, if I am going to watch a sport, I like to watch football. I might watch hockey in the end, or maybe baseball. I'll watch the Olympics, but football is the one that I will thrive and enjoy watching. And I will read about football all year long. After the football season, I'll start to read about the draft and the draft order. After the draft, I'll read about free agency. I don't think it's an obsession. It's just something that I enjoy. And I like the NFL. I'm not huge into the CFL anymore, but the NFL, and this year my team I picked ahead of time was the Bengals with Joe Burrow as the quarterback. I was all pumped for him to have a great year, and they are having a terrible year. He's having a good year, but their win-loss is not good. But I'm okay with that, because after that I'll cheer for the Detroit Lions. And after that, the Buffalo Bills, and after that, the Vikings, and after that, the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, I have other teams. I'm not sold on the Bengals. A friend of mine says I'm incredibly wishy-washy, that I'm just jump on any bandwagon, and I'm okay with that, because I'm watching for the sense of enjoyment and fun. Not so with college football. With college football, I am chained and bound to one team. And that one team, if they do well, I'm happy. If they don't do well, I'm devastated. Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I saw one of their games way back when I was living in Indiana, and they are my team. And this year, they started off with an incredible victory, and then they lost to a team that no one can figure out why. And now they're doing well, and they had a great game yesterday, and so looks like they're going to get into the playoffs. And I'm excited for them, but I'm also hesitant. Because ever since I've been watching them, they have broken my heart every single year. And the one year they made it to the championship playoffs against Alabama. And I remember I set up stuff in the basement. I had like 2 types of Doritos. I had Mountain Dew. I had other chips and stuff. Like, I had a snack party just for me with all sorts of varieties and stuff. And I was so excited. And I set everything up. And the rest of the family kind of looked at me and they said, like, okay, Dad, but and I started to watch, and if it is possible, and obviously it was, they were blown out in the first 5 minutes. In the first 5 minutes, you knew that not only were they going to lose, they were going to lose badly. And I sat there in my deep despair and putting salt on my Doritos with my tears as I sat there and ate, and I was just sad. And the kids came down to see, because this was quite a few years ago, and they're like, how's it going? And they saw me, they were like, oh. They went back upstairs, and they just left me alone in my sorrow and my torment. But I sat there, and I realized that the rest of the family, and Pam can't watch if I get too emotionally involved, because then she gets sad, or she'll get mad, most likely, and then it affects her, and it affects the kids. And I realized as I was sitting there that I have a choice to allow, and how much I will allow this to affect me. Sure, I enjoy football. I enjoy the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I'm glad they won yesterday. I'm sure they will lose in the playoffs, but if they're going far, I can enjoy it. But I don't have to let it affect me in such a way that it affects the people around me that I love and care for. I have a choice in allowing how much it matters to me. And this is important, because we actually get to choose what matters in our life and what doesn't matter in our life. We get to choose how much we invest emotionally, spiritually, physically into things, and how much we do not. Sometimes people feel like they are bound and trapped, that this has to matter, and the things that people get obsessed about. And like I say, with me for a long time it was Notre Dame Fighting Irish, or other things that you suddenly become, this is so important. You see it with some people in their yards, and how everything has to be perfect. I think our neighbor used to be that way until she lived beside us, and our leaves just kept flowing over into her yard, and she's finally just kind of like accepted the fact that this is the way it's going to be. But you have people who are incredibly obsessed, who have to cut their grass the same way, who trim, and that's fine. It can be a healthy kind of passion. But we often allow those things to become something more that control us in ways that they shouldn't, that become more important when we realize that we are paying more attention to some of these things in our lives than we are the people in our lives, or the things that if we were to be asked, we would say yes, matter more, and yet we choose to let the other matter in such a way that it impacts the rest of our lives. We focus often on what our present need and desire is. And we say, this is what's important. Today, like, I am going to make supper and I want the kitchen to be perfect in the way, and I put out everything the way and I want it. And suddenly then when someone comes by and asks the question, well, sorry, no, I'm getting my kitchen ready. And I have to, we focus on what we need immediately, and we lose sight sometimes of what is really important, of the larger picture, because we come too focused on what's right in front of us. But it's important for us every once in a while to take a step back and say, what are the things that matter the most? What do I choose to say, this is my foundation? This is what I base my life on. This is more important to me than anything else. Because if we don't, we just get distracted. We just pay attention to what comes before us and leaves, and we're so busy watching everything that we never actually take the time to remember, yes, this is who I want to be now, and this is who I want to be in the future. This is the foundation I stand on. And so this Sunday is actually one of those Sundays that we are given the gift to step back and to say, what is important to me? This Sunday is the last Sunday in the electionary year. It's called the Reign of the King, or the Reign of Christ, or it might have other names, but it's the reign of, what's that?
Christ the King.
Christ the King. But it's the last Sunday. Next Sunday is the first Sunday in Advent, which is the start of a new year in the lectionary. I think it's year C next year with Luke. But this year, we're finishing it off with the reign of the King, with the reign of Christ. And I was reading the passages, and Don did a fabulous job of picking hymns. Except that, yeah, it's really hard to compliment Don sometimes. But Don did a fabulous job in picking hymns that exactly aligned with that. That whole idea of Christ central, Christ important, Christ our foundation. And if we say that Christ is our foundation, if we call ourselves Christian, if we say that God is our beginning and our end, then we need to take time in our lives to step back and to say, yes, this is the case and this is what it means for me. That if I'm going to proclaim it, then this is how I must live it. We are not to be the people that simply proclaim our faith 1 hour of the week and then go on and live a life that is not at all shaped or formed by that proclamation or that faith. If we are to put God first, then let us think about what that means. Let us take time and dedication that we know that the life we live is formed and shaped by our faith. That we look down and say, okay, this is what I stand on. This is who I am. This is what shapes me. Because if we don't actively take the time, if we simply assume it and never actually give it the focus, the attention, then even though our desires might be for that to be the case, if we don't put in the time, most likely we will get pulled away. We will get distracted. We will start to focus on things that are not our foundation. My faith is my foundation. It is what shapes me more than anything else. I see myself, if you were to ask me what's important to me, I would say being a husband and a father, being a minister, being a chaplain, being a good neighbor. All of these things are very important to me, especially my family. But first and foremost, it is my faith. First and foremost, it is my love of God and God's love of me that forms and shapes everything about me. Or so I hope. Because it is what makes me, I believe, a better father, a better husband, a better chaplain, a better minister, a better person. When I tap into that love that I believe comes from God, that called me into being and the people around me. When I remember that I was loved even before I was born. When I remember that I am loved and I receive the grace even when I fail again and again and again, and still I am loved. It calls something in me to respond to that love of God and to have that time and commitment and relationship with God, but then also to share that love and that grace with the people most important in my life. And my foundation then shapes how I do everything else. Sometimes it doesn't shape it as much as I think it should. Like sometimes maybe I get impatient when I am driving, or I am in a store and there's a long lineup and the people in front of me decide to talk about something other than the groceries, and I have to wait there 15 minutes while they're chatting, and I will start to be like, but that's when I rely upon that grace that is part of that foundation. Not grace so I can make mistakes and it doesn't matter. Grace so I can make mistakes, still be loved, and try better. And even when I screw up again, try better again. I've shared this before, but there have been Sundays when I have walked out of here and I've just been devastated because I have felt like I just failed the whole congregation. That my sermon was not what it should have been, and that God had called me to something and I had failed God and I had failed you, and I walk home and I'm in a down mood. But the beauty of being and standing on the foundation of Christ's love and grace, of having Christ be center, is then I can feel the grace lift up that sense of disappointment and failure from me. And to say, learn from this and try again. If we live a life based on love and grace, if we live a life based on the reign of Christ in this world and the next, it should matter. It should shape us in everything else that we do. And we need to take time and recognize that if this is our foundation, if this is the most important thing to us, what are we doing about it? How do we make sure that this stays central? Do we spend time with God? Do we meditate on God and on God's word? Do we take time in our busy lives and say, but if Christ is so important to me, where do I find Christ in my timeline? Where is Christ on my phone schedule? Do I have some place where I will step back and say, let me make sure that my foundation is good. Let me make sure that I am standing on solid ground before I venture back into that world. This Sunday, I was kind of surprised. I knew what the readings were going to be, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do? And I started to read them, and it was just, in a sense, a blessing. Because it was a reminder to me that I am loved, that I do have grace, and that I have been called to share the greatest gift in the world, and to remind people that they stand on that very same foundation. That Christ is central in my life, and from that center, everything else is better. Matthew grew up in a small town, and Matthew just did not like his town. He didn't really fit with the people around him. It's because the people around him did not understand him. Matthew had gifts. Matthew had talents. Matthew was going to change the world, and they couldn't recognize it in Matthew. And Matthew always had that sense of being kind of a fish out of water, that the town just wasn't right for him. And he felt like they didn't appreciate all that he had to offer. And he didn't come from a great family, and all these other kids, they came from families, and they all had friends that watched and cared for each other, and he was always the odd one out. And on sports teams, he could have been the best player if other people had passed to him, but no one ever passed to him. No one ever really acknowledged him. And he was incredibly grateful when it was grade 12 to be able to leave this town and all these people behind because they didn't get him. And they missed out on knowing who he was. And he went to university and he realized the same thing there at university. The people there didn't get him. They didn't understand his gifts and his talents. And he left them as well. And he kind of, through a few different jobs and a few different aspects, he stumbled into the insurance business. And Matthew realized that he had a mind for insurance, for the percentages, the coverage, the different things, and more importantly than the numbers, he could sell insurance. He had a gift for kind of catching on to people's fear and doubt and pulling it out to the forefront and letting them know that the insurance was the blanket they needed, was that safety net. And he would highlight all the dangers and the worries in the world and all the injustice, and the insurance was the answer. And he did incredibly well. And within 10 years, he was a manager, and in 20 years, he was running his own insurance company. And he was doing well. And he could not wait. In fact, for the last 20 years, he had envisioned this going back for his graduation reunion and showing everyone who Matthew was. They called him Matty, but they wouldn't call him Matty anymore. He was coming and he was dressed in a casual way with a wardrobe that was easily $5,000. And he made sure that his Rolex watch was nicely on display. And he had that tendency anyways of always kind of shaking his arm and having his Rolex catch the light. And he had his Mercedes that he drove in, and he went to the reunion early so he could park his Mercedes right in front. He was going to bring his Porsche sports car, but his ex-wife got it in the divorce. But that's fine. He was bringing his Mercedes. He was parking it in the front, and he was going to have everyone walk through the front door, see this Mercedes, and come in and see him with his clothes and his Rolex, his hair perfect. And they were going to realize, oh, we should have gotten to know Matthew when he was with us. We should have appreciated Matthew when we knew him. We should have been more attentive to Matthew. And now they are going to come and they are going to fawn over Matthew. They are going to tell him how fantastic and great, how wrong they were to have dismissed him, and how sorry they were. And he sat there at the table and he waited. And there was one person in particular that he really wanted to impress, Robbie. Because Robbie was that kid. It's not that he disliked Robbie. Robbie was nice to everyone. Robbie was that really annoying kid that everyone always just seemed to like. And Robbie always managed to do things in such a way. And he was the only one that called Matthew Matthew. He didn't call Matthew Matty like everyone else because he knew that Matthew didn't like it. But Matthew wanted to show Robbie that even though everyone liked him, that he should have paid more attention to Matthew. And so he sat there and he waited, and everyone started to come in, and they were kind of talking, and they were all just happy, and they're like, oh, hey, Matty, good to see you. And they'd shake his hand, but they weren't giving him that sense of praise and adoration that he wanted. There was Steve who came, and Steve was dressed up, and Steve drove another nice, he had an Audi, but it wasn't as nice as his Mercedes. And he had a Rolex, but it was a cheaper, and Stevie was just so needy. And he was dressed up and he was trying to impress, and Matthew looked at him and thought, oh, he's a wannabe. And for a brief moment he thought, well, maybe I'm like Stevie. Maybe I'm that sort of needy. But then he goes, no, I have a Mercedes. I have a nicer Rolex. I'm not like Stevie. I am special. But none of the other people seemed to notice it again. Well, it's not that they were rude or obnoxious to him. They didn't take time to praise him or to say how sorry they were that they didn't spend more time with him when he was in high school. To appreciate how incredibly well he was doing. And at one point he even brought up a conversation with one of the guys, and he said, so what kind of vehicle do you drive? And the guy says, I drive a truck. And Matthew said, maybe we should swap. I can give you my Mercedes and I'll take your truck. Kind of expecting the guy to say, oh, that'd be fantastic, that'd be great. And the guy said, well, So yeah, it'd be nice, but it's probably pretty hard to feed my cows with your Mercedes. I don't think you have that much trunk space, and you definitely don't have clearance to get down my driveway. So thanks, but no thanks. And Matthew was just... And then finally Robbie came in. And like usual, everyone kind of gravitated around Robbie. But Matthew waited, and he kind of cut through the crowd, and he went up to Robbie and said, "Hey, Robbie, it's Matthew." And Robbie said, "Oh, Matthew, good to see you. Wow, how are you doing?" And Matthew said, "I'm doing really well." And Robbie said, "I'm so glad. I'm so glad. We lost touch, but I'm glad that life has treated you well." And Matthew then, feeling that he needed, said, "Oh, yeah, I own my own insurance business." And Robbie said, "Wow, that's fantastic. I'm sure you must, give a lot of people comfort with your insurance." And Matthew was thinking, "Well, I get a lot of money from people, but yeah, I'm sure maybe I give them comfort." But then he said to Robbie, "Well, what do you do?" And Robbie says, "Well, I run the local grocery store." Matthew was like, "Oh." He says, "Oh, so you just stayed in town the whole time?" And Robbie says, "No, I went to university for a bit, and then I worked for some nonprofit organizations. I traveled for a bit, and I was helping people around the world, but I realized I really wanted to come and help the people back home again. I wanted to make a difference. So I came back here," and Matthew would later find out that actually Robbie owned the grocery store, and it was actually written up in the national papers because it had this novel plan of having a food bank at the back of their grocery store, so that when stuff would get thrown out, they were actually funneling it in such a way, and it was kind of trying to make a new trend. And Robbie was actually doing all sorts of different things that he had learned with his work in nonprofits to try to make his community better. And the more Matthew talked to Robbie, and the more Robbie was he was always downplaying everything, but the worse Matthew was feeling. He didn't get that sense of accomplishment, that sense of adoration that he desired. And he ended up leaving the grad reunion early. He got into his Mercedes and he closed the door, and thankfully it had tinted windows, and he gripped the steering wheel, and Matthew had his midlife crisis right there in that Mercedes. And he was shaking, and the tears were almost starting to come, and he was gripping his steering wheel as tight as he could. And there was a knock on the window. And he was like, and he pulled himself together, and I'd say he rolled down the window, but it's Mercedes. He pushed a button, it went down. And there was Robbie. And Matthew goes, "Oh." And Robbie says, "Yeah, sorry, I didn't see you leave. I wanted to catch you." He says, "Look, one of the things we're trying to do here in the town is start up a co-op insurance. Like, the insurance fees are so high, and a lot of people can't afford them. And we thought maybe we can do something co-op, but we don't have that expertise. You do. I'm wondering if you'd give us even half an hour on Zoom. Like, tell us, are we idiots? Are we stupid? Where we should go? What we might do? I understand. Like, we can pay you if you want, but we're just looking for some guidance on how to set up an insurance co-op, if you'd be willing to." And Matthew was like, yeah, I can do it. No, you don't have to pay me. And in fact, you're only like 40 minutes away from the city. I can drive down, and yeah, I might have some idea. You know that co-ops are non-money makers. And Robbie said, "Well, that's kind of the point." And Matthew goes, yeah, I guess it is. "Yeah, no, I can work on that. Yeah, actually there might be some interesting things we could do. And Robbie said, "Thanks," and gave him his number and said, "Call me, and we'll set up a time when it works for you, and then we'll come together." And Matthew rolled up his window and started to drive back to the city. And when he had been driving to the reunion, he'd been tight with this smile of like, I'm going to finally get what I deserve. But when he was driving back, he realized that he was relaxed. And he was thinking about how can he make a co-op that actually worked and helped people. And suddenly he noticed that he was smiling. And he thought, well, that's weird. If we don't take time to remember what's important in our lives, if we don't step back and say, what is our foundation? Advertisers, the world, our government, churches, whatever, everyone is more than willing to tell us what should be important to us, what should be our priorities. Sorry. this week I invite you to take some dedicated time and think, what is important to you? What is your foundation? Who is it you want to be today, and who is it you want to be tomorrow and the day after? But then also, once you've decided that, reflect and think, what am I doing to actually make that the case? What am I actively planning so that I am the person who I want to be, and that I am standing on the foundation that I believe is my foundation?